Hey everyone, welcome to another BRStv Q&A. We're doing something a little bit different today because we've got a special guest, and that is Thomas today. Welcome to the show. How's it going?
How's it going? It's going great. Thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
This is exciting. I've got an AI Thomas sitting next to me for this Q&A, so hopefully you guys have a lot of questions for reefing for Thomas to answer today. I'm really stoked about that. But before we start answering some questions, there's been a lot of new things happening here at the BRStv studio and just on BRS in general. First thing I want to highlight is that we've got over 200 corals from ORA this week, which had Josh very busy unpacking corals all day, which is insane. But they're in the MaxSpec tank, which is behind me. I don't know if it's on camera or not, but it's back there. Josh put some radions on there and new wave makers with the AI orbits, which I think is a really good combination to get a lot of flow, a lot of light, get those corals lit up and looking really good in the next couple weeks. So
awesome.
That was a busy day. And then we've also got a couple new products going live on the website over the last couple of weeks. I saw the Nios tanks. We got a couple new models of Nios tanks, which is super exciting. I think they're probably one of the most popular tanks that we sell right now. They're flying off the shelves. So if you haven't seen those, go check them out. And then something I'm really excited about, and I think Thomas is also pretty excited about, is those Deltec skimmers we have now. And you were telling me that you're starting to play around with it?
Oh, yeah. So I've had mine for not very long, but enough to get it out of the box and to start doing the preliminary research that I usually do before I do a product video, so I can know it intimately before I try to talk about it. And there's a lot going on with them that's really interesting. They've got this riser pipe on the outside that's beside the gate valve that you'd normally have that actually lets you see the water level inside of the skimmer body separate so that you don't have the bubbles in the way, kind of messing up the view. And it also, we were talking about earlier, it also doubles as a way to prevent it from overflowing the cup, which is ingenious.
I think it's brilliant. Rather than having to wait for a float switch to kick in, or you coming home and seeing your skimmers just overflowing and all your skimmates now back in your tank, it just stops it from overflowing in the first place. It just lets all the water out.
Exactly.
Which I think is super cool. It's also got that manual neck cleaner, I think, on all the models, so you can just manually clean the neck as often as you like, or as little as you'd like, but it's there. So I'm really excited about these. I can't wait to see Thomas's video and how much you learn and like these skimmers in the next couple weeks.
It's going to be fun. Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah, so those are a couple of the new things. If you guys have any reefing questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Let us know. Thomas and I will do our best to answer them and see if you can stump us. I like people that ask really difficult questions. That make me really think. Because then I leave this video and I'm like, now I got to figure it out.
Yes. If I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know. And I love it when I don't know, because then I have something new to learn, which is always super exciting.
I think so too. So let's dive right into it. We're going to start off with a couple that we didn't get to last time with Will and I. So Keo5295 joined us last time. He said, hi, I've got a problem with magnesium at 1080 and alkalinity at 6. I want to know which one you need to dose first to get to ideal parameter dosing, and then next. I appreciate the help. So Thomas, low magnesium and low alkalinity, what would you recommend starting with?
So generally, anytime I've got low levels, and some are high. So let's say if your calcium's where it should be, your alkalinity is low, and you're saying your magnesium's low, the first thing I personally like to do is a decent water change. It doesn't have to be massive, somewhere between like 20 to 30%. And what that does, because your salt mix is going to be essentially at your baseline where you want it to be, that water change is going to help pull all of your parameters, anything that might be high still or anything that's low, pull them both back to kind of neutral. So you're going to get closer to that baseline you want to be at in the first place. And I would personally probably tackle alkalinity first. It's low on the safe end of low. Like, I wouldn't want it to go any lower than 6, but if you get it up to say 6.5, 7, that's a much more comfortable spot to be in. And then I would probably pull the magnesium the rest of the way up from there. 1080's not a great number. I would say 1100 is probably the safe end of low for magnesium, like where I'd be comfortable calling it okay. But it's close enough to 1200-ish that I think you could get your alkalinity up and then grab the magnesium right after. But that's, I bet you have a slightly different answer.
I personally have a little bit of a different approach. I do agree that doing the water change first is going to be the first step that I would do for any chemical correction that you're trying to do. So whether it be your magnesium, whether it be your nitrate and phosphate, water changes are going to be your like all-in-one solution that solves a lot of issues in an aquarium. So start there. If you still need to make an adjustment to get magnesium up and alkalinity up, I would personally start with magnesium just because there is the whole chemical balance between magnesium, calcium, and alkalinity. That magnesium is the one that kind of prevents calcium and then the alkalinity from precipitating out. So if you have like extreme differences between calcium and alkalinity, if you try bumping alkalinity up, then you might end up getting precipitation if your magnesium's not there. So I would personally go magnesium first if it were me. But other than that, I would keep it the same. But you're, like I said, you're at alkalinity of 6, so you're not like too far out of the normal range. You're one point away.
Yeah, you're not tragic. It's not tragic.
Could be worse, much worse.
Yes.
But you're good. Thank you for that question. Next one I see is Victoria Fernandez, 6432. I purchased a toadstool leather coral about a month ago, and I've relocated it twice already, as I cannot get it to expand its polyps for more than a couple days. I'm a little concerned about moving it another time, as I've read that leather corals do not like to be moved around too much. What would you do?
Ooh. So I've had so many leather corals over the years, and most leathers, whether it's toadstool leathers or cabbage leather or finger leather, whatever, it doesn't matter, they all go through a shedding period. Typically, when they go through a shedding period, they end up just being retracted. They'll shrink down, not like to a miserable level where they look like a prune, but you'll notice their polyps aren't extending. What will usually happen is within, I would say 3 to 5 days, you'll notice they get a really glossy sheen on top of them, like super, super glossy looking. And then a few days after that, that'll all come off. They basically shed a layer of their skin or mucus layer. That comes off, and then they open right back up, and they'll stay open for another month and a half until they go through that cycle again, and it'll rinse and repeat. The cool thing with a lot of soft corals, especially leathers, is that they don't necessarily look the same all the time. They have these cycles that we don't see in other corals like LPS or SPS. So yes, they can be upset and get finicky and pull up in their polyps if they're uncomfortable, if something's crazy out of whack. But if all of your parameters are within a reasonable level and none of your other corals seem to have any issues, there's a good chance it's just getting close to shedding. Otherwise, anytime you have any corals that may be acting a little funny, that might be due to chemical warfare between corals, my first line of defense is always just grab a bag of rocks, 0.8 carbon, and chuck that in the sump or in your rear chamber or in your whatever filter you're using on your system, and allow that to make sure that any chemical warfare between corals is actually getting pulled out, so they're not experiencing it as much, because it's going to happen, especially in mixed reefs. It's unavoidable. So yeah, if it's not shedding and it's prolonged and it's not coming around, then I would just go straight to the carbon.
I think that's all solid advice. I would also say it's only been about a month. The coral's still relatively new to the aquarium. In your case, tier 2. Corals take a lot of time to acclimate to a new condition, so you have to think about you're adding the coral from your local fish store or friend that you got it from. It's going to take time for it to adjust to the light parameters, the flow patterns, all the water chemistry that you got in your tank. So if it's only been a month, I would just take it easy. I would not recommend moving it again. I would just leave it as it is, and then just understand that it's going to keep polyps closed and go through the shedding phase, especially in a newer tank and new environment. It's going to be adjusting to a lot of these parameters to get adjusted and be happy where it's at, and then it'll flourish from there, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So patience is key, and I think Thomas hit a lot of good points to keep an eye out for, just long term with any mixed reef and soft corals in general. Excellent. So we got some questions from the current live. See that Matthew asked a question. What can I dose to strictly bring up pH only? Soda ash, I'm already dosing Alpha Reef. DKH is 12 to 14 and pH is 7.8. I think this is an interesting question because a lot of people want pH boosting without the alkalinity being affected.
Yes, this is a very tricky one. And I say that because this is an issue that a lot of people have been trying to remedy for like the last 20 years. Okay, it's not new. So the good news is what you're experiencing isn't outside of the realm of normal. A lot of people struggle with this. One of the biggest issues with trying to affect pH alone is that there are too many things outside of your calcium and your alkalinity and those levels in your tank that can affect your pH. And you cannot easily change the pH in your tank permanently. So what I mean by that is if you need the pH to be lower, which is not what you want, but if you did, you could add acid to the tank and drop the pH. But it will just go back up on its own because it'll be buffered by the amount of carbonate in the tank. So in freshwater tanks, they want a lower pH for plants. They have a harder time because there's so much carbonate in the water, and then they can't get it to stay down. It'll come right back up. In saltwater, it's the same problem. So you want to raise it back up, but something's causing it to drop again. Usually, that thing that's causing it to drop is CO2 that's in the air. So what ends up happening is the CO2 that's in your room will end up in your water. It happens because your protein skimmer is mixing it in. If you've got a protein skimmer, all the surface agitation that causes gas exchange, all of that is going to cause CO2 from the air to end up in your tank. So the trick is really not so much to try to raise the pH of the tank, because if your alkalinity is where it should be and your calcium is where it should be, it's already going to buffer it as high as it possibly can. What you want to try to do is reduce CO2. So one of the ways that we very commonly do that is through CO2 scrubbers. And all that really is a CO2 absorbing media that we put in line with the protein skimmer's venturi, so that the air from the room has to go through that media before it actually gets into your skimmer. And then that will pull out excess CO2. Then you're injecting less CO2 into the tank because, there's less of it passing through the skimmer. And then your pH naturally comes up. Not always a ton. Sometimes we're going from 7.9 to 8, or we're going from, on the extreme end, 7.8 to 8.1. It really depends on how much CO2 is in your home. Another really interesting way that you can combat it, if you're in an area that'll allow you to do it, is just leave a window open. The more air circulation you have in your home, or if you have an air exchanger, that's pulling air from outside, then what you end up doing is you naturally reduce the CO2 by getting it out. The CO2 is from us breathing in our homes, from your pets breathing, depending on how you heat your home, it can be from a number of things. But the goal is really less CO2 in the air should result in a higher pH in your tank.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's no additive that's strictly going to dose and raise pH for you. Every single pH boosting additive is going to have something to do with alkalinity. Everything on the market is there. It's essentially going to be doing the same thing that kalkwasser does, which is it's a hydroxide, so it's highly reactive to CO2 and takes the CO2 out and converts it to oxygen in a chemical reaction to kind of give your tank calcium and alkalinity, and that's going to boost those parameters while also doing pH, but that's only temporary because your skimmer is going to pull in more CO2. If you have friends over, you're going to be having more CO2 in the air. But some really good points. If you can't open a window year round, but have the ability to and have a decent sized protein skimmer, you can run the skimmer line outside. You can drill a hole in the wall. I've had friends that do that to bring in outside air from CO2. Just make sure that it's not like ground level, and if you do any lawn treatments or yard treatments with pesticides and stuff like that, you don't bring those into your tank because that's not good.
Absolutely.
I've had people that where they do have a risk of that, they put a reactor with carbon in it, so that way they can kind of mitigate any contamination, which I think is really cool. But
absolutely, yeah.
Outside air, if you're really into houseplants, you can put your reef in a jungle botanical garden type of thing and deal with it that way. But that's a lot of plants that you need.
Oh yeah.
But good question, Matthew. So short answer, there is nothing to dose. It's all about doing CO2 management. So whether that be opening your door or opening your windows, CO2 scrubbing your protein skimmer, or for the time being, until you have a more mature reef tank that has more corals in it that are going to photosynthesize, I would consider looking at kalkwasser as an alternative to dosing all for reef for the time being. pH is really important to you. Just because I saw it's also similar to someone dosing all for reef, SteamAx says, or asks, does all for reef act as carbon dosing? I couldn't figure out why I had so much trouble keeping nitrates and phosphates from bottoming out. I think this is something that people often overlook with all for reef. I don't know how nerdy you are with all for reef and how it works, Thomas, but I think it's really cool that it's a bacterial-driven way to add alkalinity and calcium and all those trace elements to your tank.
Yes. I can speak to all for reef pretty well because I used it exclusively on an SPS-dominated tank that was like about 120-ish gallon system.
Okay, pushing it.
And I was dumping a ton of it in. Like, I think I don't know what they cap it at, like 25 mil a day or something.
I think so.
I had it at like 57. Like, it was high. But there are no negative effects really to doing it. I did not find it a significant source of phosphate or nitrate reduction, nutrient reduction. I actually had to also dose NP balance to get my nutrients to come down at all. It does require bacteria as a part of the processes to basically break down that calcium, or is it the alkalinity? No, it's the calcium and alkalinity are bonded together.
Yeah, it's like calcium formate.
What's it called again?
Calcium formate.
Thank you. Yeah, it is calcium formate. So the bacteria basically break down the calcium formate, and in the process, you end up with calcium and carbonate as the result, which is really cool. The trials and tribulations of it are usually that it's hard to test for because you can't dose it and immediately test. You have to wait for the bacteria to do their thing. So it's something that you'd want to test on a weekly basis to get like a net sum result at the end, or test daily, but expect to not get any results for the first few days you're testing. But back to your actual point, I have not found that it is a significant reduction in nitrate or phosphate. But I do feel that in today's world of reefing, trying to keep nitrate and phosphate up is a bigger challenge than trying to get it down. Back in the day, we had such a hard time getting nitrate and phosphate low, and we were always trying to shoot for much lower numbers. Now it's the opposite. Now we're like, where does it go? You put it in your tank, it just evaporates, it disappears. You could dose phosphate and then like not get a reading the next day. So there might be something else at play, but I am curious what your thoughts are.
I would say I haven't noticed it with every single tank that I've had Alpha Reef used on, but I have noticed some where it does seem to be lower with Alpha Reef dosing. And then if I switch over to like ESV or the BRS2 part, they naturally like trend back up. I think it kind of depends on just the generic biodiversity that you have in the aquarium. So not every tank's going to have this, but because it is a bacterial process, and bacteria as just a means of reproduction as a living organism require nitrogen and phosphorus in order to just have cell tissue and stuff like that, it is possible that it is part of a reason why you're seeing that, but it's not like a bacterial dosing approach in the same way like NOPOX would be.
Yeah, so it's not. It wouldn't be an aggressive form of carbon dosing, or even something I could say would be like a substantial way to carbon dose.
But like you said, reef aquariums nowadays, it's harder to have nitrate and phosphate. If you would have asked me 15 years ago when I first started this, if I wanted to dose it, I would have said, hell no.
What did you make a product for? Who's going to use that?
I would have thought you were crazy, but I would just look at your what you're feeding. I would look at your just filtration methods and approaches. If you're using like a fleece roller, you don't need as big of a skimmer. If you're using an UV sterilizer, look at that. But just look at your overall filtration approach, and you may need to cut back on filtration, or this might mean that you have more room to feed your fish and corals more. So just finding a balance. Thanks for the question though, SteamX. I see Chris Benthal asked, what do you think of biocubes? And I guess my brain's going two different ways with this. I'm thinking the aquariums, but I'm also just thinking like biological media. There's two different ways.
I'm not sure. Yeah, if you mean here, I'll start with the tank. If you mean the tank, the biocube was for its time a really, really great way to get the average person into a saltwater aquarium. They had, they were like the first really iconic all-in-one system that people were using. I think in a way they kind of popularized all-in-one systems, but boy, oh boy, did people have a hard time with them. When you're dealing with that small of a water volume, like the BioCube 8, even the 14, it is super, super challenging. And it led to a lot of people just it being the gateway. Like you'd start with that tank, you get some clownfish and anemone, and quickly realize it's going to be a lot easier if you upgrade. So I think it was a really good way to just popularize the reefing hobby. And this was like the biocubes were shortly after like Finding Nemo came out and stuff like that. And that's when everything exploded. So don't get me wrong. I'm pretty sure most of my job exists because of Finding Nemo and, and the biocube. So, but would I get a biocube today? Probably not. I would probably push you to something that's going to be a little bit larger, at least the 30-gallon range. I mean, you can go smaller. You can do like a 15-gallon or 14-gallon, and that's still okay. But the open top design where you get to pick your own light, something that's going to be more substantial than what a biocube typically offers, is going to be a better route for most people. So, yeah, They have a place in my heart, but I wouldn't at all recommend them at this point. If you mean biocubes as in like media, they're a great way to get a lot of extra surface area in your tank. That's really important if you, for example, decided to go bare bottom, which I think is becoming less popular now, or if you're using extremely dense rock or extremely sparse rock. So if you have very little rock in your system and you want to add more surface area, you could do it that way, and they work really well. They're also a really great way to seed biomedia so that you can then start another aquarium with it, or help a friend out by saying, hey, here's some of my microbiome and everything that makes my tank great, plus all the problems I've ever had. Here you can, take that and start your system. So yeah, they're very, very useful and really helpful. So hopefully I answered both those questions efficiently.
I think you got both ways I was heading with it. I would definitely say biocubes were a place where I started personally. Ironically, it was like my second tank. The first tank I had was like 125 gallons. I went a little too overboard by first dive in, but biocube was like this seems much more approachable. I will say with the biocube, I personally just, even when I was starting out, would it like tore off the lid, wanted to upgrade the light, wanted to switch out the pump. So like it seemed like a good affordable way to get in, but then you start upgrading and it's like I just spent more money. I could have just got a cheaper, just basic all-in-one tank and then done it all for a little bit less. But
yeah,
that's just my personal approach. I would go with an open top rimless one. If it were me, I'd look at something like Waterbox, Red Sea, or even if you're like brand new to the hobby, the Hello Reef kit is a great option. Like that's something that I wouldn't swap any equipment out for. I think it's good as it is
absolutely
from the get-go. So a couple of things that I would think about there, and then just biomedia in general, whether it be cubes or spheres or anything like that, I think is just great all around. There's no harm or foul in having biomedia, no matter how you look at it. But great question. Thanks for asking that. Jennifer Linkus, what advice would you give a person thinking about getting into the saltwater hobby? I think there's a lot of pieces of advice we could give, and I kind of hinted at one with the last question with Hello Reef. If you haven't had a tank before, Hello Reef is probably the easiest way to get into it. You get a whole kit that has everything you need, and then you get helpful videos from Matthew, who is a great teacher, whether it's reefing or any of the other subjects that he's taught in his lifetime as a teacher. So I would go that route personally as someone new to the hobby. He'll learn the ins and outs of a reef tank, how to care for clownfish and anemones, and that'll get you all the foundation of what you need before you get into anything more serious.
Yeah, I actually fully agree with you. The nice thing about that kit is it's not going to break the bank. It's going to give you everything you need, and like good equipment. None of that, like you said, none of that equipment I would swap out. I think it's a solid way to get into the hobby where you don't have to make any like important decisions that could make or break the experience for you. And it does it in a way that if you decide you really enjoy it and you want to dive deeper, you want to get like a larger tank, like a 4-foot tank or something big, and that you're going to have in your home for a long time, and it's a hobby you want to get into, that's a great way to find out without going crazy. Because not that I've never met anybody who like dove into the reefing hobby and went big to start with who like really regretted it. I haven't really come across that. But it is really nice to be able to start with something super approachable, super affordable, find out exactly how you feel about the hobby and how you'd like to proceed, and then go into your next tank. And I think even if you decide that one tank, which it's entirely possible, that Hello Reef kit could be your first and your last tank, you might have it for 5, 6, 10 years, whatever, and just really enjoy it. So either way, it's a win. But I agree. The only other advice that I would give somebody who's new to this is to be patient. It's really easy to rush things or make silly little mistakes, or even when it comes to like dealing with pests. I did a whole series called Help I Wrecked My Tank that shows you how to work through dealing with very common pests that you're going to most likely run into. And the key thing with all of it is just patience. Nothing really happens super quickly with a reef tank. So nothing good happens fast, and bad things can happen quickly. So taking it slow and being patient with your system and enjoying the entire process is one of the best ways to make sure that you're going to come out the other end really enjoying it and with a really beautiful reef.
I agree with. And if I'm just going to add a piece of advice that's not with Hello Reef, just separately, I would pick one source of knowledge and pick a mentor. So whether it's you're inspired by someone that's on Instagram, YouTube, or if you like the BRS tanks and want to talk to our customer service team, we're here to help. So we want you to be successful, whether that's asking what protein skimmer to pick, or if it's just asking general livestock advice, we're here to answer all of it. But pick one source of information, or a mentor is the best way to go about it, in my opinion. Just that way you're not getting 12 different answers to the same question. Because if you ask what protein skimmer to get, and you go on like Reef to Reef, or you go on Facebook, or just ask the world, you're going to get 100 different answers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point.
So that would be our advice on that. Thank you for asking, Jennifer. Hopefully you have a tank soon. We want to hear about it, maybe in a future live update if you join us. I'd love to hear about it. Christopher Matthews asks, how should I acclimate a Maxima clam? So that's a good question. I personally have not acclimated clams myself because I've only just observed Will doing all the clams here that we've gotten historically.
Oh man, here's the thing. I haven't had clams for a really long time, but I love tridacnid species. I think they are one of the most fascinating and beautiful things that you can have in a reef tank. Acclimating a clam, it depends a little bit on the clam. However, my general approach, and there may be updated approaches now, so I'm going to give you what I have done in the past. But my general approach with clams has been to not just try to acclimate the clam through like a drip or something like that, but it is important, obviously, like with any saltwater invertebrate, you don't want them to go through temperature shock. You don't want them to go through salinity shock. You don't want them to go through, any sort of drastic changes. So whether, I don't necessarily think they need to be dripped in. I would probably take like a cup of water from your tank and put it into their bag, every 15 minutes for a couple of hours at most, just to make sure that the parameters are pretty similar when you're going to transfer them in. But for me, the most important thing is clams' shells can have all kinds of stuff on them. If they're coming from a farm, which most of them are now, it's a little bit less of a worry. A lot of the farms do a really good job of keeping these clams pretty pest-free. But either way, like Aiptasia, algae, hydroids, all kinds of things will grow on the shell just like live rock, because as far as the rest of the ocean's concerned, a clam shell is just live rock.
Yes.
So I like to take a toothbrush with the clam closed. I'll usually harass them shut. So I'll just pick them up and just turn them over in my hand over and over in the bag until they close completely. I'll pull them out of the water, which they can be out of water for a lot longer than you'd expect. And I would just scrub their shell down and then use the bag of water they were just in as a way to dip them to get whatever I've brushed off of the shell, do their entire shell pretty thoroughly, and then transfer them to your tank. I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten like different kinds of ulva or bubble algae or Majano anemones off of clams. Like, it's too many times. I've had a lot of clams and they've brought a lot of stuff into my tank. But just make sure you scrub down the outside of their shell with like nothing super hard bristled, but like a toothbrush usually works pretty good. A not used tooth. Go buy a toothbrush from the dollar store. Don't use the one you're going to put back in your mouth.
Yeah, that's really solid advice. Also, just say when you're doing that, make sure you don't damage the mantle. So the mantle of the clam is very important to not damage, because that's gonna or the foot. Both those things. Just be careful about how you're handling it. So if you are going to scrub it, like Thomas said, don't damage those two parts, because if you damage those two parts, it's going to have a heck of a time getting settled in at all in the new tank. So
that's a really good point. The easiest way to tell if you're getting too close is if you're getting to a part of the shell that's glossy and white, you're too close. So the byssal opening, which is underneath the clam, it looks like a little oval basically. Stay well away from that. That's where their foot's going to come out, where they attach their threads to hold themselves down to a rock. And you don't want to go to the top scoots. You want to stay between the bottom, like the bottom scoots and the top scoots. That area in between with a toothbrush is fine. Don't do it aggressively. You don't want to break scoots either. You're not necessarily going to hurt the clam, but I think it looks awful when you break scoots. But yeah, you just want to clean the area in between. Stay well away from flesh.
Solid advice and good question. Thank you for asking that. Lucian Chitaru. Hi guys. In short, I have the NO4 at 0 and for more than a year and the PO4 at about 0.2. I started dosing nitrate and I got it around 2 parts per million consistently, but PO4 is not going down, even with GFO. What do I do? So it sounds like they've had low nitrate at 0 for a year, but now it's at 2 parts per million, and phosphate's still at about 0.2, and they want to get it down, and they're using GFO.
Yeah, 0.2 is pretty high. I'm surprised with GFO that it's not coming down for you. That sounds like it could be a couple of things. Either you're adding a ton of phosphate in somehow, which usually would be feeding related. So using like a lot of frozen food and or a lot of like pellet food that happens to be heavy in phosphate can cause that, because phosphate going in, yeah, your fish are going to eat it, but some amount of it's going to end up in the water no matter what, either through their poop or through uneaten food. So that's the first place to check. You can actually look on the food containers and stuff and see how much phosphorus, if it's listed, is in the foods, and just try to trend towards something that has maybe slightly less phosphate, or something in the system isn't consuming phosphate the way it should be. Bacteria will consume phosphate. So your microbiome, to some degree, should be pulling phosphate out. Algae will pull phosphate and nitrate out of the water to some degree as well. So if you're not I would expect that if your parameters were that high, that you would have a lot of algae in the system taking advantage of that. If that's not happening, to me, that says something's out of balance. I don't necessarily think you have to try to get algae in the system to deal with this. I think there's easier options. Even if you say you like your foods and you don't want to switch what foods you're feeding, there are still other approaches. NP-Bacto Balance from Tropic Marin is awesome for this. One, it is one of the more gentle or relaxed ways to carbon dose. It's not as aggressive as a lot of the other carbon dosing products out there. It's a targeted carbon dosing, so the actual carbon chain they're using isn't as bioavailable to other organisms that you wouldn't want to have it, like algae. So it's going to be tailored more towards the actual bacteria you're trying to harbor to start reducing your phosphate and nitrate. And the other thing it does really well is it adds a little bit of nitrate and phosphate to the system at the same time. It's a very minute amount, and it's just there to help keep things in balance. That's why it's called NP-Bacto Balance. So what you don't want to have happen is you start carbon dosing and bottom out on one of those things so it doesn't exist anymore. Your nitrate's already low, so you don't want that to get any lower. You just got it, it sounds like you just got it to register. So you don't want that to drop, but you do want your phosphate to drop. So traditional carbon dosing is going to drop both with absolutely zero countermeasure to prevent both from falling. NP-Bacto Balance will have that little bit in there to try to keep your nitrate afloat while you're getting that phosphate reduction. So that's probably the approach I would take. Double check your foods, make sure they're not crazy high in phosphate for some reason. And then, I would probably just stop using if you're going to start carbon dosing with NP-Bacto Balance, stop using the ferric oxide for now.
I think that's really solid advice. And if you wanted to flip the coin and do GFO, I think it might be a sign that you're not changing it out frequently enough. So GFO has a limited capacity for removal. So something I would consider is change it a little bit more frequently. If you're changing it once a month, try every 2 weeks for a little bit. That should help.
That's a really good point.
Also, maybe check your reagent for your phosphate test or your phosphate test in general, because maybe it's just there's an error happening, whether it be with the reagents being too old or having been exposed to oxygen for too long. So I don't know what test kit you're using or what the reagent shelf life is that you're using there, but I would check that as well. Wouldn't hurt to get a second phosphate test.
Sanity check. Yeah.
Or
absolutely.
just go to your local fish store, have them say, hey, your phosphate is actually this, or this is what we're getting. So then you can just verify before you do anything too drastic. But those are the couple of things that I would think of as far as phosphate goes and getting that down a little bit lower. And then also just another thing that I feel like I iterate every single time I'm on the live, but look at your corals in your reef tank. If they are looking happy, if the colors are looking good, they're growing really good for you, I wouldn't worry too much about it and do anything too drastic, because in my experience, it's always the knee-jerk reaction to fixing a number that ends up causing my corals to no longer look good.
Yeah, that's completely fair. If it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, if like your corals are going to say a lot, sometimes they don't tell you until it's a little late, and then you don't know why things are going wrong. But I agree. Like if the tank's looking good and 0.2 phosphate is high, but it's not the ceiling's going to fall on you high. It's just high. Like I'd expect, like I said, algae growth. So definitely sanity check with a separate test kit or having somebody else test it just to make sure that your test kit's saying what it's supposed to. And yeah, solid.
Awesome. Great question. Made us think a little bit and talk about 2 different approaches to phosphate management, which I think is cool. But Josh has shared with me that we had something happen and go live on the website just now. We have the Red Sea Reefer G3 tanks are out. So Red Sea's got new versions of the famous Reefer series of tanks. And I think what I've seen is pretty good as far as upgrades to the system. So they are now swapped over to a gate valve. So it's no longer the diaphragm valve. So plumbing has changed. And I think that's probably been the biggest complaint that I've ever seen with the Red Sea tanks personally, especially when I was in CS. Everyone's like, I can't get this valve to work. I can't get my level dialed in. And I've even experienced it myself with the Red Sea tanks. Gate valve is going to help that immensely, I think.
Yes, the gate valve is a huge upgrade. That's something I think a lot of us have been asking Red Sea for a number of years now. So that's really, really good. I also saw that they've started adding Euro bracing to the 425 and above, which is so nice for a number of reasons. Let me count the ways. So obviously it's really good for making sure that you have panel strength, right? That you're not going to end up with any bowing or anything like that. Should make them a little bit friendlier when it comes to using like a wave maker with a standing wave. Not a lot of people do that anymore because, you know, it looks great, but it can be a little unruly for aquariums. Euro bracing really helps with that. So that's a really nice option to have. The thing that I really like about Euro bracing is that when I'm cleaning the glass and I get close to the top, I don't get salt water down the front of my tank when it sloshes over the lip and then gets on the pad of my magnetic algae scraper, and then I wipe salt all over the front of the I hate that. I hate it.
I hate it so much.
I know, dude. So like Euro bracing for me, like everything else is secondary. The strength is like probably the number one reason, but for me, I just love the fact that it contains the water so that I don't get splashing all down the front of my tank.
I 100% agree that my biggest pet peeve with every rimless tank I've had is as soon as I get too close, it's now a 15-minute cleanup job as opposed to just doing a quick 5-minute clean the glass.
Exactly, 100%.
But that's super exciting. I think Josh dropped a link in the chat if you guys want to check it out and see what's new with those. But I'm super excited that there's a new generation of Red Sea tanks, and they've considered feedback from the customers, from both you guys and us as professionals in the industry. Yeah. It's good. Gabriel Bustamante, my Innovative Marine 175 gallon has the fabric of biomedia balls in the 3 filter cups. Do I need to remove them when dosing phytoplankton every day, or should I just leave them out altogether? So I want to start off with, those are actually like a mechanical filter. They're not like a biomedia. So it's the same little fabric balls that they use with the Nuvo series. It's just a bigger amount for those larger tanks. So those I'd recommend you pull out and clean every couple of days. And treat it like a filter sock is how I would treat it. So if you're feeding something that you want to leave in the water column for an extended period of time, take it out. Just that way it has time to circulate throughout the tank and feed it, whether that be phytoplankton or if you're dosing like reef roids or benepets, anything like that. But it's not a bacteria will grow on it, but it's not like a biomedia in the sense that it's like not like a ceramic biomedia that you leave in there for the purpose of biome or bacterial growth.
Yeah, they get bogged up. I've used them on Innovative Marine tanks a few times. They get bogged up pretty quickly and very densely, which is why they don't actually make a decent biomedia. It's not that they lack, I mean, they do lack surface area compared to like a sintered glass or a ceramic or a quartz media. They are just impossibly porous. But the real reason they make a bad biomedia is they get clogged so fast that nothing's going to survive inside of them. Like the bacteria just won't work. And then you'll get biofilm on the outside and they get really like slimy and squishy.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate truth is, just like a filter sock, that's just going to break down over time and add nutrients back to the system. So yeah, absolutely clean them often, and I would remove them when dosing phytoplankton or zooplankton, even aminos and stuff. I would probably just take them out so it will circulate through the system. Your other option is, depending on if whether or not you have a DC return pump and what kind of return pump you have, but this might be an upgrade worth looking into. There are return pumps out there that do a very good job of running the system at minimum. I think you can accomplish this pretty easily with an Apex, as well as some other systems. But you can get the pump to run at a speed that just barely gets water down the overflow. It's basically just designed to keep the water in the pipes so that you don't drain the pipes, but otherwise effectively shut down your filtration. You run it like that for 15 minutes, after you've dosed, 20 minutes maybe. Let just the circulation pumps in the tank that are circulating your water for your corals do the moving around and mixing that phytoplankton wherever it needs to go. Then have an automatic timer, like on the Apex, or depending on which feeding pump or return pump you have, it might have a feed mode. And then let it come back up to full speed and circulate the water after. That way you don't have to take them out every time and deal with that, which is kind of a pain.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I went there as soon as I finished. I was like, could just do like a feed mode, or if you have one of those, like a Vectra pump on there, you can just set it to feed mode, and it'll just barely turn that water over, so you don't have to remove it. You don't have to think about it, or remember to put them back in. Like take them out and then realize 2 days later, oh, I didn't put my sponges back in.
Yeah, not the end of the world. Like I've run systems without mechanical filtration, and they do okay. You just get a lot of stuff that builds up in the sump over time, which means you're vacuuming the sump out more often. But yeah, not the end of the world if you forget to put them back in. But ideally, having a return pump with a feed mode is so much easier.
Yeah, it's game changing in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I'm lazy.
So am I. I think every reefer's lazy in some way, for something. So it's there. Great question though. Thank you for asking that. Thor Morgan Samuelson. I'm going to set up a 190-gallon tank and want to focus on corals. What should I focus on? What kind of salt, etc., is best? So I think this is a little loaded, a little broad, just because it's all-encompassing. As far as what you should focus on when it comes to corals, pick whatever corals you like. If you're focusing on corals, you want it to be something that you enjoy, because you're the one that keeps the tank. You're the one that has to look at it every single day. I could share my 2 cents of what corals I would personally do. Thomas would probably do something completely different than I would. So just do what you want to do. And then I'm going to touch on salt, just because I've got an opinion on salt. Pick the salt that is going to match the parameters that you want to maintain in the tank. So if Tropic Marin Pro Reef does not match what you want to keep in the tank, so if you want to keep alkalinity at 10, Tropic Marin Pro Reef is not the best choice for that. You want to do something like Instant Ocean, which matches it a little bit better. Secondarily, you might think, I don't want to clean my mixing bin every other week or every single time I mix salt. So kind of factor that in. There's a lot of different options out there. But look at parameters first, and then pick those other features, so to speak, of the salt second.
Agreed.
What other product category or like aspects of a reef tank would you consider focusing on, Thomas?
Oh, man. So here's the thing. I think if we're super honest, there are so many competent products that you really can't go horribly wrong. You are going to have trade-offs here and there with maybe, certain features or certain, quality of life improvements that are on this product and not on that product. This one's easier to open. This one has a magnetic locking lid. Like, the truth is you're just going to have to figure out what kind of features are important to you in products, and then look for products that have those things. So I am admittedly a super lazy reefer. So for me, when it comes to dosing, I like Alpha Reef because it's one pump, one product. It takes care of mostly everything I have to worry about, and then I have less things to think about. So for me, that really works. There are people who are like, Alpha Reef, I'm not there for it. I'd rather do 2-part and then dose all my, trace elements separately. I like micromanaging things. That's how I prefer to do it. Does that make their way better than mine? It's different, but it's not better. It works for them, awesome. What works for me, awesome. So just figure out like what tickles you when it comes to the hobby. If it's the gear and you like really, cool, fancy gear with a lot of, interesting options or tunability, go for that. If you want something that you can just plug in and not think about it, there are options for those people too. Go for that. the end of the day, whatever's going to make the hobby for you is what you should try to focus on, because we're all different. The way I reef is going to be different than the way Kyle reefs or the way Will reefs. We're all going to have slightly different approaches. We have different budgets. We have different end goals. There might be equipment that they'll need that I won't even bother with because I have a completely soft coral tank, and having much higher output lighting just won't make a difference for me. So it's a lot easier to do this. Actually, this is what I'm getting to. It's a lot easier to do this if you decide what your goals are before you start building the system. If you build the system without any goals in mind, you might find out later that it doesn't match what you want to accomplish. And that's either, sometimes it means you have to repurchase something because it's not going to be strong enough. Sometimes it means you're going to have to turn things way down and you overspent already because you don't need that much power, whether it's the amount of lighting you're using or the pumps you're using, having too much flow. So figure out what you want from the get-go. Look at corals, decide what speaks to you. A lot of people love LPS. A lot of people like the challenge of SPS. I personally think the laziness of soft corals is probably the easiest thing on the planet for me. But decide what you want to do first, and then start tailoring the system to that, and you will have a much easier time finding success than just throwing what other people say is the best equipment, a mishmash of that together, and then trying to force that to work in a way that will accommodate what you actually end up deciding is most important for you.
I think that's really solid advice. That's the exact same way I would go. Honestly, it's the corals, pick the corals that you like and then fit the system around that. Because if you're building a tank that is going to be acropora, millipora dominated, that's the only coral you want. It's going to be very different than someone that wants to set up a zoanthid or a macroalgae saltwater tank. Don't need the same things. So keep that in mind. And then I want to say thanks for the question. I like those questions that make us think and like really go down a rabbit hole of thinking about how we would set up a tank and share that expertise. And then I got Jay, who's got a question. Does anyone know if the Apex can work on a 4 gig Wi-Fi router, as I can't get to tune the network with it and don't want the same issues with an Apex? 4G.
Here's my
Wi-Fi.
This is my advice. If you're running an Apex, I'm pretty sure it's 2.4 gigahertz is the bandwidth it has to be on if you're going wireless. What I did with mine, and what I do with almost every device in my house, because so many things operate on 2.4 exclusively, but most of our routers do both 2.4 and 5G, because our phones often now are 5G. A lot of things can work with 5G, but it doesn't have a really great range. And a lot of other products like home networking products don't use 5G. What I like to do is I'll use a Wi-Fi extender and use a network cable. So the Wi-Fi extender is what's talking to my home router. And then the network cable is what's plugged into the Apex. That way, you don't have to worry about 2.4. You don't have to worry about 5. It doesn't matter anymore. The Wi-Fi extender will handle the communication between your router and your Apex. And your Apex has a stable wired connection. It's the fastest connection for the Apex to use. It's the most stable connection for the Apex to use. So that's what I would do. If your Apex is close enough to your home router that you don't have to get a Wi-Fi extender, skip the extender. Like even if you have a way to get 100 foot of networking cable from your home router down to where your Apex is, do that. That is the best way to do it. Plug it in direct. That's my general opinion is if you can plug it in direct, that's what you should do.
I 100% agree. Hardwired connection is going to be better than a wireless connection at all times. So I would do that. And then if you do want to get more in-depth answers, I would always contact our customer support team or the Neptune support team at any time. They can answer that, especially the Neptune support team can answer that like in-depth and get as nerdy as you want. They have network people that are honestly gurus with networking and Wi-Fi connections. So I would recommend doing that just to get a more solid answer, but I don't think 4G is going to be an issue because the Apex has been around way longer than 4G has. So, good question. Thanks for asking that. Gabriel Bustamante has another question. CJ UVC kit 13 watt. My tank is almost 2 months old. When should I add this to my aquarium? Used ocean direct substrate and dry marco rock. Tank hasn't visually gone through an ugly stage yet. Thank you. So I'm going to broaden this to just UV sterilizers in general. When do you recommend adding a UV sterilizer to a system, Thomas?
Almost never, but my caveat is UV sterilizers can be very helpful for battling certain things if they get way out of control. I also like them on fish-only systems. I find them to be potentially detrimental on a reef tank if they're on there all the time. UV, it will indiscriminately damage all cells that go through it. It doesn't know what's good or bad. It's just going to try to kill everything. And that can mean that you're going to inhibit your microbiome from diversity. That's not necessarily the end of the world because we don't fully understand yet what parts of a microbiome are the most important. We don't understand what ratio is going to be the most successful. We're getting closer to that with the DNA testing that has come out for aquariums. Aquabiomics has, the longer they're around, the more data they have, or a compendium of data of successful reef tanks and what those microbiomes look like. But one thing that has become apparent is when you throw a UV sterilizer on a reef tank, that microbiome shifts dramatically. And it shifts towards things that I'm assuming are either not able to float in the water column, so they don't go through the UV, or they shift to probably that and to anything that can go through that UV and survive somehow. So, I mean, UV can be helpful in that, like, it's really good at getting rid of like dinos.
Yeah, certain forms.
Yeah, it can be very good at dinos. It can be very good with free-floating algae. It can be really good with certain protozoa. Anything that floats through the ick, it can help slow down the reproduction of ick when it's going through its free-floating stage. But for me, the drawbacks don't outweigh the benefits for a reef tank. They do on a fish only, because if I can mitigate as much things like ick or any other protozoa or flukes or whatever can pass through that UV and be damaged by it, if I can prevent my fish from getting that, I'm gonna do that, because there's no reason not to at that point. Or if I have a really terrible outbreak of dinos that I can't get the best of, I'll probably throw a UV on there to try that, see if that's going to end up working. Or quarantine sometimes. The problem with quarantine is that some copper medications, if you decide to use them, are chelated, and you don't want to put that through a UV sterilizer. It'll break the bonds and it screws up the amount of copper you put in the tank. Yeah. So they are very useful tools when you have a specific goal in mind and you want to head that goal off. Not something I would call a universal tool that you should just put on your reef tank and forget about it. Yeah, that's my opinion. It might be a hot take. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure. How do you feel about it?
Your hot take is the same as mine. I am someone that never plans on just having a UV sterilizer in my system. It's always I'll have it if I need it. So anytime I set up a new tank, I'm just like, hopefully I don't have dinos that pop up. But if I do, I've got a UV sterilizer, or if for some reason like the bacterial bloom just never ends, then sure, I'll put on UV sterilizer for a couple of weeks and then have it tame back, and then I'll keep it running, but I won't turn the light on for a little bit just to kind of make sure it's good before I take it off. But it's not something that I run 24/7 or have on the tank at all times. So that's my personal opinion. Definitely a really good way if you are going through your tank. It's going to be beneficial and hurtful at the same time, because you're going to slow down the process of cycling the tank because it's a UV sterilizer hurting everything that goes through it, but also could mitigate your ugly stage. So choice is up to you. Thomas and I would say don't add it unless you need it.
Yeah.
Good question, though. Lucien Jataru has another question. Should I be worried about my 150-gallon tank? It's 11 years old, Euro-braced, and double bottom. I'm living on the 4th floor, so flooding would be very costly. I don't know what condition the tank is in. I can't see the seams. I can't see what the tank looks like. I would say unless you have like any weird issues with the silicone seams on it, I wouldn't be too worried about it personally. Unless you've had it like set up and taken down and dried out several times in that 11-year period. But if it's been set up running straight for 11 years, I wouldn't be too worried personally.
Yeah, I agree. You look at all of the seams that you can see, and if there are any signs that it's lifting or you've got bubbles collecting that weren't there before, sometimes there's a bubble in the silicone and nothing ever happens because it was there from the day it was built. But if there's anything that looks funny or wasn't there before, that might be an indicator that you might want to look into replacing the aquarium. But I mean, you described it to sound like a literal tank. So
Yeah.
if it was really well built, like Euro bracing and all that, I wouldn't be worried about the glass. It would just be the seams. And a visual inspection is usually enough to catch something before it happens. There are usually signs. Now, if you've been super rough with all the silicone and peeled it up on the edges, and there's sections where it's like completely missing or flapping in the wind, it might be time to not necessarily throw the tank away and get a new one, but maybe drain it down and have it professionally resealed. But I mean, other than that, tanks, a lot of manufacturers, even just like standard aquariums from like, I don't even know who makes standard aquariums anymore, Miracles or All Glass or Perfecto or whatever the brand is.
Yeah.
Those tanks are often rated for 25 years. And I'll tell you right now, they're not built in any particularly strong way. They're just standard aquariums with standard silicone and a plastic rim. Like, so if you have a tank that's really well built, it should last at least 25 years. So maybe you're halfway through its lifespan, but yeah, unless there's something irking you about it that just, you know, you can see there's a problem and you want to make sure that it's taken care of, then take care of it. But there's, yeah, he's right. There's no way that we could tell if it's going to explode or not.
Yeah, like honestly, if as long as the silicone's good, you don't have like a chunk of glass missing out of it, you're fine. Just leave it be, or you can use it as an excuse with your spouse to upgrade your tank. I don't know. It's a good time. It's like tank's getting old. Time to get a new tank.
Yeah. If you need an audio, like just a little recording, you should definitely replace that. Anything could happen at any time.
Thomas said so.
You can just clip that and show that to your spouse. Perfect.
Good question. Logan's Reef Tank. So we've been speaking a lot about lazy reefing and how we're both lazy reefers. Asks, what are the best lazy reefing hacks and products? Thomas, since you are a self-described lazy reefer, I'm gonna let you start.
Oh man,
you've already mentioned All for Reef is one. So what's another one?
So here's the problem with laziness. It isn't necessarily about making your life easier. It's also about making up for mistakes you make. So a couple things. All for Reef, because it's one pump, one peristaltic pump to maintain, one peristaltic pump to set up, one product, easy. I'm also like allergic to testing tanks. And by allergic, I mean I opt into being allergic to testing them. So I really enjoy using things like a Trident that will do the major testing for me so I can just see it. I'd rather change, reagents every couple of months than test, once a week. Like I can't bring myself to do it anymore. I've been doing it for like 25 years. I'm tired. Other things that I really enjoy is for my RODI, I will run it to a brute container that has a float switch, and I use an RO buddy to basically control my RO system to turn it on and off. And that way I can't forget the RO running in a bucket and flood my basement for the 18 billionth time, which I don't know how I keep doing that, but that's how I solve that problem. So I also really like automating anything where if I walk away from it can cause a problem for me. RO is probably the number one, and a float switch, a float valve and an RO buddy is inexpensive enough that it just makes sense to do. What other hacks do I have? Oh, I hate filter socks because I can't be bothered to clean them every 3 days, and they actually require that. They are almost useless if you don't do it. So I switched to fleece rollers because, again, I'd rather just swap fleece out and pay for a monthly, roll a fleece every month and swap it out once a month than have to scrub filter socks out or even throw them away and replace them. It's cheaper to run the fleece roller, and I feel like it does a better job. So those are probably the three biggest things that I've done that have made it easier for me to be lazy with things that aren't critical. Like it's critical that you have your tank, do your testing and keep the mechanical filtration going. But like, I'm not massive on auto feeders because I like observing my fish. This is the one place where I think a lot of people would be like, this is the easiest place to automate. So you don't have to, but you enjoy interacting with the fish. It's the one thing we get to do where they actually pay attention to you. So I do automate a little bit just for the anthias that are in the tank. I have an Eheim feeder that dispenses pellets in the middle of the day so that they get fed twice, but I hand feed them every morning. I still hand dose the products that I wouldn't want just going like running away. So like amino acids and foods, I'll hand dose those. Again, I get to interact with my corals if I'm going to spot feed them and stuff. I'm not lazy with that stuff. It's all of the other maintenance stuff that I try to get lazy with. What do you usually do to cut corners in a way that's not problematic?
So I think a lot of the cut corners things that I think of are things that people take for granted. So auto top offs, I think people take that for granted. They just assume that's something that you absolutely need. But in reality, you don't need an auto top off as long as you're there every couple of days to top off your water. Unless you're doing like really finicky deep water SPS that don't want any fluctuation in anything. Sure. But automatic top off is like my number one lazy reefer hack, so I don't have to do that. If you want to take it to the next level, using an Apex to just automatically fill up your ATO reservoir for you, so you don't have to even think about filling that up, then you're set. Like,
yes.
Team that up with your brute trash can and the float switch, you're set. Your water fills up for your water changes, ATO's filled up. You just have to make sure you change out the filters on the RO system every few months. And for me, just because I like really active fish like Anthias, automatic feeders would be where I would go, purely just because I know I don't have time to feed those picky Anthias like the Avanzi and stuff like that. I don't have time to feed them 6 times a day. So that's one thing that I would just advocate for. But then dosing pumps in general. So if you're dosing anything, whether it be 2-part, whether it be all for reef, whether it be if you're using like the KZ flatworm stop and the coral booster combination, put that on a doser. Then you don't have to like dose your blue bottles every day by hand. You can just dose it and it's all set. So those are my top choices as far as just automations go.
Awesome. I fully agree. All of those are also things that I implement. So
good question. We're gonna have a new generation of lazy reefers here soon.
Technology, we have it.
Okay, so we're gonna speed around these last couple questions just because we're getting short on time. Sensei Greg, I have been dealing with flatworms for months now, and flatworm exit and everything I've thrown at them is not working. What is your approach to flatworms?
My gosh, I'm assuming it's red planaria, which makes me really surprised flatworm exit is not working. That's usually, funny enough, my go-to. So there are fish that will prey on flatworms. You can't always guarantee that they're going to do it, but I have noticed in most tanks that have a few wrasses, in particular, Melanurus wrasses seem to do it. 6-line wrasses, although they can be wrasse holes. Yeah. They're just bullies. For their size, it's remarkable how much hate they have in them. An alternative that works really well that's much more peaceful is a pink streak wrasse. They're about the same size. They look very similar. They just don't have the attitude problem. But coarse wrasses can be decent, although they have their caveats. Either way, having wrasses like that in your system is a great way to minimize the chance that any sort of small flatworm is going to end up becoming a problem. But man, the fact that flatworm exit isn't working makes me wonder what kind of flatworms they are.
I had red planaria, but it was like a really bad outbreak. I had to dose it like 3 or 4 times before it really took care of it, just because I didn't want too many to build up before anything bad happened. Because if flatworms, most of them, if they die, they're toxic.
Yes.
So I had so many where I was concerned that I was going to run into like a toxicity issue with any of the livestock in my tank. So I would run it a couple more times personally, and then add a fish that's going to help with any pests. So all those that Thomas mentioned are really good choices as far as just planaria go in general. But if you have a different species, it might be a slightly different approach. But I'm assuming red planaria because that's like the most common that I've run into.
It is. There are natural predators. I haven't personally had a ton of success with them. I've had way more success with Bergia and Aptasia, but there are velvet nudibranchs. They're blue. They're black with blue stripes. They have like a kind of hammerhead shaped head.
Yeah.
They will prey exclusively on red planaria, and they do a good job. The problem is they seem to be a little more fragile than something like a Bergia nudibranch, and they don't like flow very much. So they can be
hit or miss.
Ineffective if they don't survive is the problem. If they survive, they do great. the trouble is keeping them alive. So, but yeah, the one thing you can do, because that's a very good point, if you are using flatworm exit and you do end up killing a lot of flatworms at once, before you dose, make sure you have as much water change water ready, heated, circulating on hand as possible before you do your treatments. Because if you do start to get that big die off, one thing you can't, they'll start floating to the surface and stuff. They just get knocked off of things easily. Use a fine net to try to net them out while they're dying. And if and when the treatment's done, you still have a lot of dead flatworms, they won't all come out. Some are going to be stuck in rocks or in the substrate, but the toxins will still be coming out of their body because they're dead. So doing large water change to make sure that doesn't become a problem is really important.
Yeah, awesome. We're going to rapid fire these last 3 questions, Thomas, just to get through them. So we're going to go fast. The Amazing Diverman, would you use UV for algae breakouts? What are your opinions on using canister filters like the FX6 on reef tanks? Good, bad, things to consider. I'm going to hit UV sterilizer for algae breakouts. Generally ineffective unless it's the green water situation, in my opinion, because it's got to pass through the UV sterilizer to get affected. And then as far as canister filters go on a reef tank, totally doable. Just realize that you have to treat it like a filter stock where you change out the mechanical filtration or clean it out regularly. A lot of the trap or like nitrate factory asset part of that comes from people not maintaining it properly.
Agreed. UV sterilizer, same. I'm going to have the same answer. As UV sterilizer won't be effective on most algae that grow on surfaces, and most of those algae can divide asexually. They don't have spores or anything like that, so it won't do anything unless it's just green water you're talking about. Canister filters I've used on reef tanks, SPS reef tanks. The way I got around having issues with bog up is I used only really coarse foam pads. I didn't use any fine filtration in them at all whatsoever, and all biomedia. That's the most effective, in my opinion, the most effective way to use a canister. If you are concerned, you can always put a pre-filter over the intake, and then that's the thing you'll clean out every few days.
Solid advice. Good question. KZ Tropical Fish. I had ick in a reef tank. What to do? So a lot of approaches. Depends on how you want to go about it. If you want total eradication, take the fish out, quarantine them, treat them with not proxypontil. I can't remember the chemical name, but there's a alternative to copper. That's not proxy. It's similar name, but copper treatment. Medicate them outside the tank. Leave the tank fallow without fish for 76 days or more, and then you should be good to go as far as that goes. If you're doing management, UV sterilizer, this is a use case scenario where that will help. Vary diet for your fish to boost their immune system to make sure they're healthy and happy, and then just lowering stress overall in the aquarium environment. So the less stressed out they are going to be, the better their immune system will be to fight off any parasites that are affecting them.
I can't say it any better than that.
Awesome. Good question. KG asks, my one acropora is getting white tips with algae, but it has polyps still. Should I be worried? I would say in general, yes, if you've got algae growing on a living coral, that is a sign that the coral is not doing as best as it can.
Tip burn in acros a lot of the time. I'm going to try to keep this quick. A lot of the time is being a byproduct of being overlit. That doesn't necessarily mean too much par. It could mean the lights are on for too long during the day. The tissue at the tip of the coral, the parts that are facing the light the most often, are probably getting a buildup of whatever it is. Free radicals from their biological processes, and it's just killing the tissue, and then algae's taking advantage of the exposed tissue. Long story short, move that coral down, find a way to shade it, or reduce the photo period if your par level is less than 350, like 350 or less at the highest, or bring the par down. The problem is if it's one coral, just deal with that one coral by moving it. If it's a bunch of corals, deal with it by changing your lighting.
Yeah, I think solid advice. Also, if you have very little tissue on the tips of the corals that are growing, I've typically found that in environments where there's very limited nitrogen and phosphorus in the tank, so boosting that up to kind of better match your par levels if you have really high light and really low nutrients. I've seen a lot of the corals, it's a lot of skeletal growth, but very minimal tissue growth, so the tissue takes a little bit longer to catch up to where it's growing. So balancing that out might help as well. Just a couple things to keep in mind. But Thank you for joining me, Thomas. I think this was a lot of fun answering all these Q&A questions and talking about all the new stuff that's going on. Thank you guys for tuning in and watching us live. We'll see you next time on the next Q&A.